Well, I want to welcome you to Trends and Issues 843's first narrated PowerPoint on Chapter 2A on the change-oriented educational environment and the social transformations that are occurring in America and the world and how it impinges upon our educational system. In this short video, we're going to look at the various social transformations that are defining and changing our educational environment in America. We're going to look at our society with statistics and look at the American economy, some of the things that are impinging upon our kids and our school structures, the changes in the American family and the changes in our children, and then look at the world's knowledge base and how it's impinging upon what we teach and how we do it, and finally the changes in our world's technology. So centering on some social transformations, we're going to try to look at how it defines what we do in our American classroom. Your single focus for this narrated PowerPoint and this module actually is to narrow down what is the most significant single change occurring in America today that is affecting education. So with that in mind, we're going to have some other subset sorts of topics that we'll be asking you to look at in the activities. And we'll talk about those as we go through the PowerPoint. You know, when we look at the changes in our American society, we look at our past and how we used to be a very industrial society where our decision making was centralized, where we had a national economy and didn't so much worry about the world economy, where our family was important. We had the family unit that oftentimes in the American rural system would have 3 generations of family living in the same farm. We had in the past a top-down society where decisions were made and it was kind of business as usual. Printing was our main focus of disseminating information, and most people, when it came to buying things and decisions, you were given not multiple choices but 1 or 2 choices, and that we had a two-party system and it was party politics rather than issue politics, and we really didn't respect the resources that we had and kind of exploited in the 50s and 60s what we had available to us in America. And now as we look at our society, we're more of a informational society rather than building things. We are creating things. We have a very decentralized decision-making society, which is rather by bits and pieces. When we look at our economy, what affects us is also what affecting Japan and China and other world economies. And as we see the stock market up and down, many times it's based upon what's happening in other countries. When we look at the family unit now, it's changed more to individuals, and when we look at society, really top-down decision making, it's a lot of times bottom up. There seems to be greater accountability for our decision making. Instead of printing, we have all kinds of ways to disseminate information through the media. And when we go to the grocery store, instead of 1 or 2 options, we have multiple options, way too many choices sometimes. Many people now vote by issues rather than parties. And we are on a move of sustainability, of resource conservation. So change is the only constant that we see in society restructuring as we look at the last 100 years. We could also look at generation differences, how each generation, when it reaches its milestones, they react to the big happenings of their time period, and they react to them differently than past generations when it comes to schooling, marriage, parenthood, home ownership, how they raise their children, or if they're going to have children, what their peak earning goals are, and how they're going to handle retirement. These all by generations affect our school system. Many times we find that we have living in our society six generations: the Great Generation, the GI generation, the Silent generation, the baby boomers that were born in the 40s and 60s to the 60s, Generation X from 65 to about the 80s, the Y generations from the 80s to 2000s, and then our present generation, the boomlets or the Generation X. And each of these generations seem to have characteristics defined by the age that they grew up in, and they react to schools differently. And so what I would like for you to do in the activities later on, you're going to be reading and looking at the six generations living in America and their primary characteristics, and try to develop a marketing campaign for your school and how you would what would you use to characterize your school to appeal to that generation, so that we appeal to all six generations. Kind of a very creative way for you to think through these six generations. So be interested to see what you come up with. You know, when we look at constant change in American society, data sometimes will help us illustrate those changes. And we're also going to have you visit usafacts.org. It's a large website that will define our nation in numbers, and they can show differences between different years and decades, and it looks at a host of different areas that are present in our American society. It looks at education and health, crime, economy, immigration, wealth, standard of living, social services, our infrastructure, foreign affairs, employment, child safety, and national defense. All of these will have vast amounts of statistics to see how we're changing and what actually define us through the data. And from that, we're going to ask you in the activities to from this statistical standpoint, to look at three factors that are most influencing us in our educational system. Be interesting to see if any two or three of these are the same from many of you. But there are constant changes in our society. When we look at the second area, the economy, I just want to point out just a couple of different points that probably impinge upon our school system. You know, the household income after the war, there was a rapid growth when our American veterans came back in the middle class and actually the lower class, and then as we went through the 80s and 90s, the investment class became rather favored in mean incomes, and so we saw a massive increase in our upper 1 or 2% and stabilizing of the middle income family. So household income, I think, has affected American education. Family paychecks are bigger than they've ever been before, but their purchasing power has really not changed much when you look at the statistics. Our housing costs have risen significantly over 40 years, but then they tanked in 2005 and now are on the rise again. And housing affects our children too. Healthcare costs, all have been complaining about those the last decade. But when we look at the cost for healthcare in America and other countries, it is vastly different and has risen much higher than we've seen in other countries. In fact, when we look at the increase in premiums based upon the income of our population, the average premium has risen 120%, and the average wage only 29%. So healthcare affects our kids coming to the school. The number of households with multiple vehicles, I think, plays a part in education. As we look through the 60s, 70s, and now the 2000s, how many people owned one or two or three cars over the last 4 years or last 40 years. So does transportation play a part in mobility and our children and education? One of the things that struck me as I look at statistics are the number of household TV sets that have risen over the years. And in fact, now you can watch your TV on the phone, so almost everybody can be in constant contact with different with shows. But it's immensely changed our amount of information that we receive. I remember when I was a child that we had three stations. They were all black and white when I started watching, and we always watched the news. It wasn't constant. It was at 6 o'clock at night, and Walter Cronkite told us everything we needed to know about America for that evening. So TV sets might have changed. When we look at family structure, which is the third area, our family structures have undergone massive changes over the past 100 years. Today, over 50% of our American school children are being raised by a single-parent family. That's over half. Our Norman Rockwell family of a boy and a girl, husband and wife living in a home, is only 2% of the American households presently. One in every 5 American families will change residences in a given year or have become much more transient, and only 25% of the American households have a child in school, and that may have an impact on bond issues. So a lot of times school success, many believe, starts at home, and when we see the changing American family from the 50s to today, probably a difference that impinges upon how they do. When we look at the population of families, 3 states really account for half of the population growth in America still: Texas, California, and Florida. And even though the white population has grown 8% over the past decade, their share of the population has declined from 86 to 84. And when we look at schools, we see that schools will continue to be ethnically diverse, but the faculty is not tending that way, but the faculty tends to stay stagnant, being primarily white. And the fastest growing population in America is the elderly. Well, that have an impingement upon our school system. When you look at family characteristics over the 50s, 70s, and 90s, sometimes you see quite a lot of difference as illustrated in the evolution of this American family political cartoon. Let you look at that for a second. Not only are the families changing, but our children are changing. They come to school. If you've been teaching for any great length of time, and if you knew the background of every one of your children sitting in front of you, you might see this sort of classroom, secondary classroom sitting in front of you. They come to school a lot of times with a lot of baggage, and so our children are facing a lot of challenges. When we look at the Children's Defense Fund, they comprise statistics of our American children and the challenges they face, and how every day 5 kids will commit suicide, that 12 are going to be killed by firearms, that um, 180 are going to be arrested for violent crimes. Babies born without parental care in the 400s. Babies born into poverty every day, about 1,300. So a lot of different shocking statistics when it comes to what our children are facing each day. And every child is born wanting to achieve, but some start a little bit behind the 8 ball when they're born. There is some good news when it comes to child poverty. Nationally, our kids in poverty have shown a general decline from 68 to today, and this trend is continuing. Um, we're finding more kids are are improving their dropout rate, but they're still and declining in poverty, but they're still having and struggling in school. If you look at the state of Kansas, there is a wide range of poverty disparity between our counties. If you look at locally, Cherokee, Crawford, and Lebec County, the national average is around under 20%, but here in Cherokee, Crawford, and Lebec County, we're hovering around 20%. If you look at Wyandotte County up in Kansas City, Kansas, there, I think that's the highest one with about 24% of kids under 18 living in a household considered in poverty. Johnson County, however, which is right down the road, in Olathe and Overland Park, you have only 6.5% of the kids in poverty. Our state of Kansas is below the national average with 13.7. So there is some disparity between our poor children attending schools in Kansas and where they're located. Sometimes zip codes affect our kids. One thing we know about poverty from the 1966 Coleman report, that the biggest single predictor of student success is where the socioeconomic income of the parents. And this cartoon sort of illustrates Coleman's report, that if he comes from a poor family, less likely that statistically he's going to succeed in the educational system. However, some good news. Our graduation rates are increasing and our dropout rates are decreasing. A lot of this is giving credit to some of the state issues and the focus on Goals 2000 and other federal involvement programs to increase the graduation rates of our students. Our kids, when we look at their characteristics, they are digital learners. They've grown up in this last generation with media on their phones and iPads, and typically a video game will ask a child to make a decision about every 1.5 seconds, and playing a game can make 110 decisions in a minute. They're wired now for fast decisions, and they have instant information at their fingertips with their phones and iPads, and they have multiple choices of things to do. And when teachers don't take that sometimes in effect, that our kids are quick decision makers and digital learners, sometimes they find school rather boring. When you look at knowledge base, which is the fifth area, our knowledge base is growing at tremendous rates, exponential rates. It was said that in 1980s, the world's knowledge base was doubling about every 100 years. When we looked at 1910 to 1960, the knowledge base was doubling about every 50 years. And now, when you look at what the world is developing and the knowledge base, it's estimated that it's doubling every 18 months. So in the future, it makes sense that by the time a first grade student reaches adulthood, the world's knowledge base is going to be doubling every 35 days. So you got to almost believe that we can't teach everything. That information is changing so fast, and now the important thing to know is really how to learn, how to keep up with that exponential growth of the knowledge base. When we look at job opportunities, they're going to change as the knowledge base changes. It's projected that 90% of our today's first graders will be employed in jobs that presently do not exist. When my youngest child was drawing pictures of his parents in kindergarten, I had no idea that he would now, as an adult, be a graphic designer for a national governmental website design company. He draws for a living now, but it's all on computer. That job never existed, never even dreamed of it when he was in kindergarten. And it's projected that there will be no career jobs that do not require post-secondary training. Almost anything you're going to do in the future is going to require some sort of training past high school. That we really in high school can't prepare you totally for job, but we can give you the characteristics for that. It's projected that 80% of those career jobs will not be obtained with a 4-year degree, and that an individual can expect to change jobs, and I've seen this go up now, a minimum of 10 times, and change careers at least 3 times in the course of a lifetime. At least 2 of these changes will be involuntary. So the days of having your first job and staying till you retire are almost over and non-existent. When we look at our political changes on issues over the past 50 years and even presently, our national issues, they kind of sometimes come and go and then come and go again. But national issues and the focus of federal money, state money, and individual effort can affect our schools. And one of the most dynamic influences in our school system change is now looking at the world and being competitive in the world. And the world is constantly changing just as we are. And you'll be asked to what shift happens, and here you're going to look at a number of world demographics that can affect what you do in the classroom, and it's called Did You Know? And there you'll be asked to look at if, in your opinion, the educational system is ready to prepare kids for life in this new age, this new information age. You know, one of the constant changes that I've noticed throughout my lifetime is the historical changes in technology. When I did my dissertation in 1988, it was done with a mainframe at Marshall University. We had to have little cards punched that I sent through the mainframe to do the tallies, and now I can do the same sort of multiple regressions and tallies on my iPad. Remarkable changes over the past 30 years in computers and social media and how we communicate with one another. You know, over the past 2 decades, with the advent of smartphones, I have iPhone. I can find out where any of my family are just by turning on the location devices. I can communicate with almost anybody in the world, and I love Facebook because I can keep in touch with my former students, with my family. We can send pictures, watch videos, but we network with all kinds of different networking systems. So, but not face to face. We now, with Wi-Fi and the internet, teach online. With this Kansas system, a whole different way of teaching. When I went through the educational system training at Marshall, had no idea that I would sometimes be not in front of a class, but in front of a computer, making a narrated video PowerPoint to teach. You know, tablets also have become a daily constant. I read 3 or 4 newspapers in the morning with coffee. I don't get the physical newspaper, but it's online, and I even shop anymore through Amazon, and e-commerce has been changed the way that we shop. Everything's at my fingertips. And then I got on iWatch. The wearable technology is going constant change, but it can tell me my heartbeat when I need to stand. It keeps track of not only time, but the messages I'm getting, and it's just an amazing device from my perspective. So we've seen a lot of constant changes over the past 2 decades with technology, and it's made an impact on almost all areas of our society, from education, government, finance, and retail, and entertainment, healthcare, travel, science, publishing, manufacturing. Technology has all changed those areas, and sometimes it has not been for the good. And so we're going to ask you to look at technology, and has there been any negative effects on society that you see? So constant changes when it comes to technology. Over the past decade, we've used technology to change our paradigms and how we educate kids. That now we're going beyond the school to where they learn at home, learn on the go, to learn in different places. That our textbooks are changing. The textbooks you have for this class is electronic, and your reading will be from a computer rather than a piece of paper. The roles of the student and the teacher are changing. Our classrooms are becoming much more collaborative rather than isolated. And we're changing the educational programs of kids based on what they want to do in life, and they're much more personalized towards their learning styles. And technologies can help us do that. And we're going to ask you to look at what the schools in maybe the year 2050 will actually look like. But technology is going to continue to change education. And so we see it now in learning management systems, our LEMs, which is like Canvas that we use for school and work. Your homework's now collected many times on different LEM and graded, and you communicate through your kids, even in high school and middle school, through these learning management systems. We're going to see blended learning technology-based models for individualization of kids learning at home. We're going to see testing, adaptive-based testing, replacing hopefully standardized testing, where learning simulations and game-based learning to increase those digital minds, to appeal to those digital minds. And it's going to replace direct instruction where a teacher lectures all day. We're going to see different learning technologies, or learning startups, educational private groups are going to become much more prominent and replace some of our educational programs. We're going to see open source learning, where we call them MOOCs, available for teachers and students, where these are free ways to learn. Cloud-based housing of the curriculum of student instruction, of data sharing, visual assessments are going to replace housing those in specific computers and the like. Student-directed learning studios and virtual schools are going to replace schools, and we're seeing that already. Biometrics are going to provide real-time learning feedback in our kids as they come to school. And then certificates of performance may be replacing diplomas, where now we show exactly what the kid can do as social portfolio-based self-selected types of artifacts that are going to replace diplomas, so we can actually show what kids know or are able to do. In essence, our American changes in our American society are vast, and we know one thing, that constant change is constant, and that we can't really direct this change. We can't really direct the wind, but we can adjust ourselves as schools and what we do with kids. So basically, as we've looked at these things, what do you think is the most significant single change occurring in America today that is affecting education? Is it our social restructuring, or the generational differences, or the economy, the family structure, the characteristics of our children, the world's knowledge base, the job opportunities of the future to get them ready for those things, the political issues focus and how they impinge upon education? Or is it technology or educational innovations? All of these are factors that are affecting education. But what do you think is the biggest single change affecting our kids today? Well, that's your task. And that's your task in this module activity. So let's get busy and see what you think. Bye-bye.